Aloan woke to warmth and the sound of breathing that was not her own. Her first thought was that she had died in the storm, and this was whatever came after. Her second thought, slower and heavier with the weight of returning consciousness, was that the dead probably did not ache this badly. Every joint in her body throbbed. Her fingers were stiff with cold. Her cloak was damp and pressed against her skin like a second layer of ice. But something was warm, impossibly radiantly warm, pressed along the entire length of her back. She shifted just slightly, and the warmth shifted with her. A low sound rumbled through whatever she was lying against. Deep and resonant and so powerful she felt it in her teeth. Fur. She was pressed against fur. Aloan's eyes opened. The light was thin and gray, filtering through a narrow gap in what she now realized was rock, a cave. She was lying on a bed of dried pine needles and moss inside a shallow cave, and curled around her, so close that its body formed a crescent of heat against hers, was the largest wolf she had ever seen. Her breath stopped. The animal was enormous. Its shoulder would have reached her chest if they had both been standing. Thick, dark fur, almost black, but threaded with silver along the spine and muzzle. The paws tucked beneath its jaw were wider than her spread hand. She could feel the rise and fall of its ribs, each breath slow and heavy and impossibly peaceful. This was not a wild wolf. Wild wolves did not grow this large. This was a shifter, an alpha, and not just any alpha. Elo's mind raced. She remembered fragments from the night before. The storm rolling in across the Vathorn Mountains without warning. The sky turning black at midday, running through trees she did not recognize. Soaked and half-blind, the wind tearing at her cloak, finding the cave mouth by accident, stumbling inside, collapsing on the dry ground, and feeling nothing after that. She had not noticed the wolf. She must have crawled right up against it in the dark, too cold and too exhausted to register what she was lying beside. And it had not killed her. It had not even woken up. Slowly, carefully, pressing her palms flat against the stone floor to push herself upright, the wolf's head lifted, its eyes opened, and the breath left her lungs entirely gold. Bright, burning ancient gold with pupils that contracted to sharp black slits as they fixed on her. The wolf looked at her with an intelligence that made her skin prickle. Not a predator assessing prey, a deeper recognition, an awareness that seemed to say, "There you are." Then its forehead moved, heavy and deliberate, and hooked around her waist. It pulled her back down against its chest with a low, possessive rumble that vibrated through her ribs. Aloan lay very still, her heart slamming so hard she was certain the wolf could feel it. Voices distant at first, then closer, the crunch of boots on frozen ground. A man's voice low and tense, giving orders she could not quite make out. Then another voice calmer responding. The wolf's ears flicked, but its body did not tense. If anything, it pressed closer to her, its muzzle dropping against her shoulder, its breath warm on her neck, possessive like it was making a point. Shadows darkened the cave entrance. 2 men ducked inside, the first carrying a torch that threw orange light across the stone walls. He was lean and sharp-featured with watchful eyes, and a hand resting on the sword at his hip. Behind him, 2 armed guards. The lean man saw the wolf first, his shoulders dropped with visible relief. Then he saw Aloan. The relief vanished. His expression went blank with shock. His gaze moved from the wolf to the girl tucked against its chest and back again. His mouth opened slightly. "What in the name of every dead god?" he whispered. He stepped forward cautiously. "Easy," he murmured to the wolf. "Easy now." The wolf's lip curled back from teeth, the length of Aloan's finger. A growl rolled through the cave, low and deep and utterly final. His gaze cut to Aloan with sharp calculation. "Who are you?" he asked. Aloan opened her mouth. No sound came out. She was a nobody, a packless wandering healer with mud in her hair, and a wolf she had never met, wrapped around her like she was the most important thing in the world. The wolf pulled her closer and closed its golden eyes. They could not separate them. The guards tried first, approaching carefully, with hands extended like men, trying to coax a dog from under a table. The wolf nearly took the first one's arm off at the elbow. The second guard stumbled backwards so fast he cracked his head against the cave wall. The lean man, who Aloan would later learn was Halberd, the king's beta, called them off immediately. "Stop, you will get someone killed." He studied the wolf for a long moment, then turned to one of the guards. "Send word to the king. Tell him we have found the wolf." He paused, glancing at Aloan. "And tell him there is a complication." "Let me try to move," Aloan offered, her voice small. Slowly, Halvard warned, she shifted, easing herself away from the wolf by inches. She managed to create perhaps a hand's width of space before the wolf's eyes snapped open, its growl filling the cave like a living thing. Not threatening her warning everyone else, she stopped. It does not want me to leave, she said, and the absurdity of the statement nearly made her laugh. Nearly. The wolf's teeth were too large and too close for laughter. Halvard exhaled through his nose. A decision settled behind his eyes. Bring her with it, he said to the guards. One of them gaped. To the castle. Can you think of an alternative? The question was sharp enough to cut. The guard could not, and so Aloan walked through the gates of Thornhold Keep with the Alpha King's wolf pressed against her leg, its shoulder warm and solid against her hip. It was the single most surreal experience of her life, and her life had included accidentally setting a merchant's cart on fire with a badly prepared tincture. People stopped what they were doing and stared. A woman carrying bread dropped the entire basket. 2 soldiers in the courtyard reached for their weapons before Halvar's sharp gesture froze them in place. A stable boy pressed himself flat against the wall as the wolf passed. The wolf ignored every single one of them. Its golden eyes stayed forward and its body stayed close to Eloine's, matching her pace like it had been walking beside her for years. She was brought to a chamber in the east wing, small, sparsely furnished, with a narrow window that overlooked the inner courtyard. A fire had been lit, someone had placed water and bread on the table. Wait here, Halvar said from the doorway. The wolf padded inside, circled once and lay down at Aloan's feet with a heavy sigh. Within minutes, its breathing had deepened into sleep. Aloan stared down at it, then up at Halvard. What is happening? She asked. Halvard studied the sleeping wolf for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she expected. The wolf is the king's other half, you understand what that means? I know how shifting works, Aloan replied. The man and the wolf share one soul, one body. In theory, Halvar said. His tone made her stomach tighten. He left without explaining. It was 3 hours before the wolf stirred, lifted its massive head, and padded to the far side of the room. The shift happened with a sound like tearing cloth and a rush of displaced air. Where the wolf had stood, a man knelt, tall, broad, dark-haired, still breathing hard from the transformation. He rose slowly and pulled a cloak from a hook near the door, wrapping it around himself. Then he turned and looked at Aloan. The difference between the man and the wolf was jarring. Where the wolf had been warm and instinctive and immediate, the man was controlled, contained, locked behind walls so thick, Aloan could almost see them. The authority was undeniable, built into the set of his jaw, and the way he held himself like someone bracing for impact. Pain flickered across his face. Maybe, or envy, then it was gone. My wolf has not obeyed me in 4 months, he said, and each word landed like a stone dropped into still water. He has not been calm in 4 months, he has not slept willingly in 4 months, and in one night beside you he did all 3. The weight of that statement pressed down on the room. I need to understand why, Calder continued. His dark eyes found hers and held them. You will stay in this castle until I do. He paused, and a ghost of discomfort flickered through his expression, almost an apology. That is not a request, he turned and left. Before she could respond, Aloan sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. In the space where the wolf had slept, the pelt still held its warmth. She pressed her palm against them and felt an odd ache settle behind her ribs, faint and formless, like the echo of a sound she could not quite hear. The room was not a prison, but it was not freedom either. The door was unlocked, but a guard stood outside every hour of every day. She was permitted to walk the courtyard, to visit the kitchens, to wander the lower corridors, but the gates remained closed to her, and every time she asked about leaving, the guard's face went carefully blank. Aloan had spent her entire life avoiding exactly this kind of situation. She belonged to no pack, carried no rank, claimed no territory. She had been raised by a human herbalist named Marin, who had found her swaddled in wolf pelts at the edge of the greythorn forest as an infant. Marin had taught her plants, pecuses, remedies, had given her a trade and a name and a life, even if that life was spent on the margins. She was a shifter by blood, or so Marin had always believed, given the pelts and the faint scent of wolf that clung to the baby she had found. But Eloin's wolf had never come. No first shift at adolescence, no stirring beneath the skin, no golden eyes in the mirror. By the time she was 18, she had accepted it. She was wolfless, broken in some fundamental way that could not be fixed, and now she was trapped in the Alpha King's castle because his wolf, the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, had decided she belonged to him. On the second morning, Halvard came for her. The wolf is restless, he said, standing in her doorway with the careful posture of a man delivering news he knew she would not like. Would you be willing to sit with him? Willing was generous. She had no choice, and they both knew it, but she appreciated that he bothered with the pretense. He led her to an enclosed courtyard behind the keep, walled in stone, open to the gray sky above. Handers lined the perimeter, tense and watchful, their hands wrapped in leather gauntlets thick enough to blend a bite. And in the center of the space, the wolf paced, Elo's breath caught. The calm, sleeping creature from the cave was gone. This wolf was agitation given form. It moved in tight, furious circles, ears flat against its skull, hackles raised along its spine in a ridge of dark, bristling fur. A handler near the far wall had blood seeping through a tear in his sleeve. Another was favoring his left leg. Then the wolf stopped. Its massive head swung toward the archway where Elo stood. Its nostrils flared. The transformation was instantaneous. The hackles flattened. The ears came forward. The rigid, coiled tension in its body dissolved like ice in warm water. It crossed the courtyard in 4 long strides and pressed its head against her hip, exhaling a breath so deep and long it sounded like a sob. Every handler in the courtyard stared. One of them sat down heavily on the ground as though his legs had simply given out. Aloan lifted her hand slowly and placed it on the wolf's broad skull. Warmth flooded through her fingers, up her arms, settling somewhere behind her ribs, in a place she had not known was cold until it was suddenly not. The wolf sank to the ground beside her. She sat with it cross-legged on the cold stone, and its head settled into her lap. The golden eyes closed, its breathing leveled out into the deep, steady rhythm of true sleep. The courtyard went silent. Halvor knelt beside her after several minutes, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. He has not slept like this since before the Ashenmoor campaign. The name landed with weight she could feel but not explain. What happened at Ashenmoor, she asked. Halvor's face went still. The warmth left his eyes, replaced by something shuttered and careful. That is not my story to tell. He stood and moved away, leaving her alone with the sleeping wolf and a quiet that felt heavier than the stone surrounding them. An hour passed then, too. Aloan did not move. Her legs went numb, her back. She watched the wolf sleep and felt the strange warmth behind her ribs pulse in time with its breathing. Steady and sure, she became aware gradually of being watched. Not by the handlers, though they watched too. She lifted her gaze to the keep's upper windows and saw a figure standing in the shadowed frame, tall and motionless, looking down at her, Calder. She could not make out his expression from this distance, but she could feel the weight of his attention like pressure against her skin. The wolf stirred in its sleep. A small whimper escaped its throat, soft and broken and unbearably vulnerable for a creature of its size. Its paws twitched, its lip pulled back, revealing teeth, and for a single disorienting heartbeat, Aloan saw a place that was not the courtyard, a dark forest, snow falling through bare branches. Chains stretched between trees, and at the end of them, pulling, straining, bleeding, a wolf with golden eyes, then it was gone. The courtyard snapped back into place. Sunlight on stone, hands murmuring, the wolf calm beneath her hand. Aloan sat very still and told herself she had imagined it. Her hands were trembling, but she kept them pressed flat against the wolf's fur and did not let anyone see. She told herself it was exhaustion or hunger, or the lingering strangeness of everything that had happened. She told herself a lot of things. In that moment, she did not believe any of them. Orla found her before Aloan could find Orla. The head healer was waiting outside Aloan's chamber the next morning, leaning against the stone wall with arms folded and a look on her face that suggested she had been there for some time. She was small, silver-haired, sharp-featured, with eyes the color of winter moss that missed absolutely nothing. Her apron was spotless despite the herb stains on her hands, and the way she held herself reminded Aloan of a hawk on a fence post, still and watchful, and utterly certain of its purpose. "Walk with me," Orla said. Not a question. She led Aloan through the infirmary, past rows of neatly made CS and shelves lined with jars and bundles of dried herbs, through a rear door into a walled garden where the morning air was sharp and clean. She shut the door behind them and turned. "What I am about to tell you does not leave this garden." Aloan's stomach dropped. That sentence had never preceded good news in the history of language. "The king is dying," Orla said. The words landed like a fist. Aloan opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "Not in the way you might expect," the healer continued, moving between rows of potted rosemary with practiced ease. "His body is strong, his heart is sound. He could live another 100 years if the world were kind. But the world is not kind, and the king is losing his wolf. Losing," Aloan repeated. "The bond between a shifter and their wolf is not a metaphor," Orla said, her voice low and precise. "It is a tether, a living connection between two halves of the same soul. When that tether frays, the consequences are catastrophic." She turned to face Aloan fully. "In the 4 months since the Ashen campaign, the king's tether has been fraying. His wolf grows more feral, more disconnected from him with every passing week. He can barely control the shift anymore. When the wolf emerges, it does not recognize him as its other half. It treats him like a stranger. Aloan thought of the courtyard, the bleeding handler, the way the wolf had paced like a caged thing. What happens if the tether breaks completely? He dies, Orla said simply. An alpha cannot survive without their wolf. The body fails within days. We have perhaps 2 months before the separation becomes irreversible. 2 months. Aloan gripped the edge of the stone planter beside her. The world felt unsteady. We have tried everything, Orla continued. Every healer in Volthorn, every remedy in my stores, binding rituals, tether-strengthening tinctures, meditation guided by the oldest wolf shamans in the Northern Territories. Her mouth thinned. Nothing has worked. The wolf rejects every attempt at reconnection. It has grown violent toward anyone who approaches the king during a shift. 3 handlers have been hospitalized this month alone. But not me, Aloan whispered. No, agreed. Not you. The air between them felt weighted, expectant. Do you know why? Aloan asked. I have a theory. Orla studied her with those sharp green eyes. Tell me about your wolf. Aloan stiffened. I do not have one. You are a shifter by blood. I have never shifted. My wolf never came. The words felt like confession. An old wound pulled open and laid bare. Snorts. I was raised by a human woman. She thought my wolf might be dormant or damaged. It simply never manifested, or gaze did not waver. A wolf does not fail to manifest child. Every snorts, shifter-born, carries their wolf from the moment of first breath. If yours has never surfaced, it is not absent, it is sleeping. A flicker stirred in the hollow of Aloan's chest, faint and warm in the place where she had felt the wolf's presence resonate. The question that concerns me, Aura continued slowly, is not why your wolf sleeps. It is why the king's wolf seems to know that it does. The implication hung in the air, vast and terrifying. You will continue with the arrangement, Orla said. Every evening, stay near the wolf. Allow it to sleep beside you. I will monitor the king's tether and see if proximity to you slows the deterioration. She paused. It is the only thing that has given us any hope in 4 months. Aloan nodded, her throat tight. She felt the weight of it settling onto her shoulders, the crushing responsibility of being Thingsy's single thread holding a king's life together. One more thing, Orla added as Aloan turned to leave. That warmth you feel when the wolf is near the one you have been pretending is not there, Aloan froze. Pay attention to it, or said quietly. It is trying to tell you something. A rhythm formed, fragile and strange, and unlike anything Aloan had ever known. Each evening, as the light faded and the castle settled into its nighttime quiet, a guard escorted her to the lower keep. The room they had given the wolf was deep in the oldest part of the fortress, a vated stone chamber with a fire pit at its center and thick pelts layered across the floor. It smelled of smoke and pine, and something wild and ancient that she could not name, but that made her pulse slow the moment she stepped inside. The wolf would be waiting, sometimes pacing, sometimes lying near the fire, sometimes standing at the narrow window with its gold eyes fixed on the dark mountains beyond. But the moment she entered, it came to her always without hesitation. It pressed its head against her hand or her shoulder or her side, and the tensions bled out of its massive body like water from a cracked vessel. She would sit, the wolf would lie beside her, and it would sleep. Aloan slept too, curled on the pelts near the fire, with the wolf's warmth radiating into her back. She learned the rhythm of its breathing, the slight twitch of its ears when it dreamed, the way its paws flexed against the floor during deeper sleep. She learned that it preferred her left side, that it growled softly if she moved too far away, and that it woke immediately if she stood but settled again the moment she returned. In the mornings she would wake and the wolf would be gone. Calder would have shifted back before dawn, reclaimed his human form, and left without seeing her 2 halves of the same soul that refused to exist in the same room at the same time. Except slowly that changed. It began with small things. Elo mentioned to Halvor that the pelts were thin near the fire pit, and the next evening a thick woolen blanket had been folded at the foot of her usual spot. She did not ask where it came from. A few days later, a proper pillow appeared. Then, a tin of the blackberry tea she had told the wolf she liked. Talking into the dark the way she always did, filling the silence with whatever came to mind. The wolf could not have procured blackberry tea. The wolf did not have hands. Thank you for the tea, she said one evening to the empty room, knowing perfectly well the gratitude would reach the man, even if the wolf was the only one present. The wolf's ear flicked. She bit back a smile. She talked constantly during those evenings. It was a habit born partly from nervousness, and partly from the realization that silence made the wolf restless. She filled the space with stories. The time she had accidentally cured a farmer's goat. Instead of the farmer and the goat followed her for 3 villages, the way Marin used to sing off-key, while grinding valerian Root the merchant in Dunroth, who had tried to sell her a love potion that turned out to be beet juice and pepper. She told the wolf things she had never told anyone, about growing up without a pack, about watching other children for the first time and knowing hers would never come, about the loneliness that lived in her bones like a second skeleton, always present, never acknowledged. The wolf listened. Its gold eyes watched her face, and sometimes it pressed closer as though it understood. On the 9th evening, Calder was there when she arrived. He sat in a chair near the fire, still in human form, a report open on his knee. He did not look up when she entered, did not greet her, did not acknowledge her presence beyond a slight tension in his shoulders that told her he knew exactly where she was standing. Elo hesitated in the doorway, unsure of the protocol. The arrangement was with the wolf, not the man. But Halvard had told her to come, so she crossed to her usual spot, sat on the pelts and waited, the quiet stretched thick and awkward. "The goat," Calder said after several minutes, still not looking up from his report. "The one that followed you, what breed was it?" Aloan stared at him. Her mind went blank, then raced. She had told that story to the wolf 4 days ago, which meant he remembered what the wolf heard. The man and the beast still shared memories even as they were tearing apart. "Blackmore pygmy," she managed, stubborn as death and twice as persistent. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, not quite, but the ghost of one, the suggestion that somewhere beneath the iron control a man existed who was capable of amusement. It vanished before she could be certain. He read his report. She sat on her pelts. The fire crackled between them, and for the first time the quiet did not feel heavy. It felt almost companionable. Later, after he had left and the wolf had emerged and settled beside her, Aloan lay awake and thought about the ghost of that almost smile. She thought about blackberry tea appearing without explanation, about a pillow placed exactly where her head rested, about a man who listened through the ears of a wolf he could no longer control, and remembered the breed of a goat from a story told in the dark. The warmth behind her ribs pulsed softly. She pressed her hand against it and closed her eyes. On the 14th evening, the wolf did not come. Aloan waited for an hour in the fire-lit chamber, sitting on her pelts with her hands folded in her lap, watching the door. The wolf always came every night for 2 weeks without fail. Its absence felt wrong in a way that went beyond disappointment and settled into dread. The door opened. Calder stepped inside, and the sight of him drove the air from her lungs. He looked destroyed. Deep shadows carved beneath his eyes, his skin pale and drawn, his shoulders hunched forward like a man carrying a weight that was slowly crushing him. He moved to the chair by the fire and sat heavily, and his hands, she noticed with a spike of alarm, were trembling. "He will not shift," Calder said, staring into the flames. "For the first time in months I wanted him to come, and he will not." The crack in his voice was small, almost inaudible, but Aloan heard it, and it broke open a space inside her chest she had not known existed. She did not ask permission. She rose from the pelts, crossed the distance between them, and knelt beside his chair. "How long since you've slept?" she asked quietly. He did not answer, he did not need to. The answer was written in every line of his face. Orla delivered the news with the clinical precision of a woman who had spent decades saying difficult things to people who did not want to hear them. "The tether is deteriorating faster than I projected," she told Aloan in the garden the following morning. "His wolf's periods of emergence are growing shorter and more erratic. The calm we were seeing in your presence was slowing the separation, but it is not enough." Aloan gripped the stone planter. "What else can we do?" Orla was quiet for a moment, choosing her words. "The wolf responds to your proximity, your scent, your presence, the resonance of whatever dormant bond exists between your sleeping wolf and his active one. But the wolf is only half of him." She paused. "The man needs to respond." Aloan felt the implication before Orla spoke it. Physical contact with the king in human form. The healer said, "Not just nearness, touch. The tether is a living thing and it needs to feel you through both halves of him, not just the beast." The heat that crawled up Elo's neck was immediate and ferocious. "You want me to touch the king? I want you to keep the king alive," Orla corrected. "The method is secondary to the outcome." Calder's reaction was exactly what Aloan expected. He refused. The word came out hard and flat and absolute, delivered from behind his desk without looking up from the correspondence he was pretending to read. "I am not going to be handled," he said. "No one is suggesting handling," Halbert replied from the doorway, his tone carefully neutral. The healer is suggesting sustained physical contact during your evening rest period. That is handling with prettier language. It is survival, Halver said quietly. Calder's jaw tightened until Aloan could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. He said nothing for a long moment, and the air between them grew heavy enough to choke on. 2 days, Halver murmured to her as they left. He resists everything for exactly 2 days, then accepts it like it was his idea. It took 3. On the 3rd evening, Aloan entered the chamber to find Calder sitting on the pelts instead of the chair. Not near the fire, on her spot, in her space. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, his back rigid, his hands resting on his knees with the careful stillness of a man trying very hard to appear calm while being anything but. He did not look at her, or says proximity is insufficient. She does, Aloan confirmed, hovering near the door. She says contact is necessary. She does. Another pause. His jaw worked, his gaze stayed fixed on the far wall. I do not know how to do this, he said, and the admission clearly cost him dearly, because his voice came out rough and stripped like he had dragged the words out by force. Aloan crossed the room and sat beside him on the pelts, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. She could feel the heat radiating off him, could smell his scent, cedar and iron, and a deeper note beneath both that was purely wolf, purely him. Her pulse hammered, but her hands were steady. You do not have to do anything, she said. Just sit, he sat, she sat. The fire crackled. Minutes passed. The tension in his body remained absolute. Every muscle locked, every breath controlled. Then Aloan reached over and placed her hand on top of his. The effect was immediate and devastating. Warmth exploded behind her ribs, the same warmth she had felt with the wolf, but magnified tenfold, blazing outward through her chest and down her arm and into the place where her skin met his. She gasped. Calder went rigid. His breath hitched, his eyes, which had been fixed on the wall, snapped shut, and when they opened, they were gold. Not his usual dark gray. Gold, the wolf's gold, bright and burning and alive in a way they had not been in weeks. The color lasted for only a moment, a single searing heartbeat before fading back to gray. But Aloan had seen it, and she had felt the wolf surging forward inside him, reaching through the fraying tether with desperate instinctive need. What was that? Calder breathed. Your wolf, Aloan whispered. He is still there. Calder's gaze held hers. Behind his eyes, raw and unguarded, desperate hope weared with the fear of believing in it. Then he looked away, swallowed hard, and said nothing. But he did not remove his hand. They sat together as the fire burned low, palm against palm, her fingers small and warm against his broad, callous ones. She felt his breathing slow, felt the iron tension begin fractionally to ease. Not gone, not even close, but loosened like a fist uncurling one finger at a time. She did not know when she fell asleep. She only knew that she woke in the gray hour before dawn, with her head resting against his shoulder, and his hand still gripping hers, not gently, tightly. His fingers were locked around hers like she was the only solid thing in a world that was dissolving beneath him. His head was tilted against hers. His breathing was deep and even. He was asleep. The realization bloomed through her with warmth and terror in equal measure. Not just the wolf, the man. The man had fallen asleep beside her, holding her hand, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion because her touch had given him permission to let go. Aloan did not move. She barely breathed. She watched the firelight play across his sleeping face and saw what no one else was ever allowed to see. The hard lines softened, the tension dissolved, the relentless, grinding vigilance that defined his every waking moment simply ceased. He looked younger. He looked human. He looked like a man who had been carrying the world and had finally just for a moment been allowed to set it down. The ache in her chest burned steady and sure, and Aloan knew with sudden terrifying clarity that she was in very serious trouble. When he woke, it happened without warning. His body went rigid, his breath caught, and his eyes flew open. He registered their position in a single sweep, her head on his shoulder, his hand crushing hers, their bodies leaning together like two trees grown into each other. He pulled away so sharply she swayed into the empty space he left behind. He was on his feet in a heartbeat, his back to her. One hand pressed against the stone wall, his breathing ragged. This cannot happen again, he said without turning around. Aloan's chest stood where the warmth had been. She flexed her empty fingers. It helped, she said quietly. Your wolf responded. Your eyes changed. He was silent for a long time. Then he left the room without another word, and the door closed behind him with a sound like finality. That night, Aloan dreamed. The dark forest was waiting for her, colder than before, the snow deeper, the silence heavier. She moved between the bare towering pines, her bare feet leaving no prints, her breath forming no clouds. The wrongness of the place pressed against her from every direction. She found the wolf. It was chained between two ancient trees, iron links wrapped around its chest and legs, biting into its fur. It was thinner than she remembered, its gold eyes were dimmer. It pulled against the chains with weakening effort, each lunge producing a sound like breaking glass. "I found you," Aloan said, dropping to her knees beside it. The wolf pressed its muzzle against her palm. And even in this place, the warmth was there, faint but real. Then she felt it, a presence at the edge of the tree, watching, patient, deliberate. A figure stood in the shadows between the pines, indistinct, featureless, but radiating malice, so concentrated it felt like standing downwind from a fire. The figure was not an accident, not a nightmare, not a memory. Someone had put those chains there. Someone was feeding this curse, and whoever it was had just noticed that Aloan could see them. She woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The wolf's chambered dark and cold around her. Her hand flew to her chest. The warmth behind her ribs was flickering like a candle in a storm. Aloan told everything. The dark forest, the chained wolf, the snow that fell without sound, the figure standing at the edge of the trees, radiating malice like heat from a furnace. She told her about the warmth that flickered when she woke, and the growing certainty that what she was seeing was not a dream. Orla listened without interrupting. When Aloan finished, the healer sat down slowly, her expression troubled in a way that Aloan had not seen before. Orla was a woman who kept her composure. The way other people kept their keys, always at hand, never misplaced. Seeing that composure fracture was more frightening than the forest itself. "You are entering the spirit realm," Orla said quietly. "The spirit realm," Aloan repeated, testing the words. "The space between the physical world and whatever lies beyond it. Shamans train for decades to walk there, spirit walkers are born to it, or gaze sharpened. You should not be able to reach it at all, let alone stumble into it by accident. And yet I did, and yet you did." Orla folded her hands, "which tells me two things. First, whatever is happening to the king's wolf is rooted in that realm. The chains you describe are not metaphor. Someone is holding the wolf there, forcing the separation from this side." She paused. "Second, your connection to the king is deeper than proximity, deeper than scent. You are tethered to his wolf in a way that transcends the physical, and that tether is pulling you across the threshold." Elo's hands were cold. She pressed them against her thighs. "The figure I saw standing in the trees. Describe it again." "I could not see features, just a shape, a presence, but it felt deliberate, aware, like it had been there for a long time and it knew exactly what it was doing." Orla's mouth thinned into a hard line. "Then the chains did not come from nowhere. Someone placed them." That evening, Aloan entered the wolf's chamber with a knot of dread lodged beneath her sternum. The wolf was there, lying near the fire, but the change in it stole her breath. It was thinner. The silver threading through its dark fur seemed duller, the gold of its eyes less bright. When it lifted its head to greet her, the movement was slow, heavy, like the simple act of recognition cost it dearly. She sat beside it and placed her hand on its shoulder. The warmth came, but weaker now, a candle where there had once been a hearth fire. The wolf pressed against her palm and closed its eyes. Aloan did not intend to cross over. She did not even know she was doing it until the cold hit her. One moment she was sitting on pelts in a fire-lit room, her hand on warm fur. The next the air turned to ice and the firelight vanished and the dark forest swallowed her whole. She was standing among the dead pines, snow drifting down through bare branches. The chained wolf was 10 paces ahead, its body wrapped in iron links that glowed faintly with a sickly greenish light she had not noticed before. It was pulling against the chains weakly. Its movements, the exhausted repetitions of a creature that had been fighting for so long, it no longer remembered how to stop. "Hold on," Aloan said, rushing forward. She dropped to her knees beside the wolf and wrapped her arms around its neck. The fur was real beneath her fingers. The cold was real against her skin. This was no dream. She gripped the nearest chain and pulled. The iron burned her palms with a cold so intense it felt like fire. She cried out but did not let go, hauling at the links with everything she had. Her teeth clenched, her arms shaking. The chain did not move. It did not even flex. The presence arrived like a change in pressure. Aloan felt it before she saw it. A weight descending on the clearing, the air thickening, the silence deepening into a predatory hush. She looked up. The figure was closer than before. Standing at the edge of the tree, still featureless, still indistinct, but closer, and it was watching her with an attention that felt like fingers closing around her throat. The wolf snarled the sound of pure, desperate fury, and lunged against the chain so hard the links cut into its shoulders. Blood, black in the colorless light, ran down its 4 legs. "Stop," Aloan begged, pressing her hands against its wounds. "You are hurting yourself." The figure took a step forward, the cold intensified. The wolf's snarl became a howl that tore through the dead trees and echoed into nothing. Aloan grabbed the wolf's face, pressed her forehead against its muzzle, and thought of fire, warmth. The pelts on the chamber floor, the smell of cedar and iron, Kedr's hand gripping hers as in the dark. She poured everything she had into the connection between them and pulled. She slammed back into the chamber so hard her teeth rattled. She was on the floor gasping, her hands burning with cold that had no source, her heart hammering so violently she could feel it in her fingertips. The wolf was gone. In its place, Calder knelt on the pelts, barefoot and wild-eyed from the shift, his chest heaving. He stared at her, his hands were shaking. Blood trickled from his nose. "You were there," he whispered. "I felt you in that place. I felt you pulling." Aloan opened her mouth to respond, but he was already moving, seizing her wrists, his grip bruising and frantic. "You cannot go back there," he said, his voice cracking. "Do you understand me? That place will consume you. It is consuming me, and I am an alpha with a wolf strong enough to endure it. You have no wolf, you have no protection. If you go back there and cannot get out." He trailed off, and the terror in his eyes was so raw it made her flinch. "I can help," she started. No, the word was a wall. "You are done. This arrangement is finished," called her. "It is finished." He released her wrists and stood, putting distance between them. His voice dropped to a cold-controlled register, the king reassembling himself from the ruins of the man. "I am grateful for what you have done, but I will not allow it to destroy you. Leave tonight and do not come back to this room." Elo felt the words land like blows. She searched his face for any crack, any opening, any sign that the man who had held her hand in the dark was still reachable beneath the walls he was slamming into place. She found nothing. He had already gone somewhere. She could not follow. She left the chamber on legs that felt borrowed and stood alone in the dark corridor, pressing her burned palms against the cold stone, and felt the warmth behind her ribs gutter and dim like a flame starved of air. 5 days passed. 5 days of silence, distance, and a growing wrongness that Aloan could not outrun no matter how hard she tried. She threw herself into work at the infirmary, grinding herbs and mixing picuses and treating the steady stream of minor injuries that flowed through Orla's doors. She organized the storeroom. She catalogued the dried herb inventory. She scrubbed every surface until Orla told her firmly to stop before she wore a hole through the workbench. None of it helped. The warmth in her chest, the steady pulse that had grown so familiar, she had stopped noticing it. The way one stops noticing a heartbeat had turned wrong, not gone. Worse, it burned. A low, constant, grinding ache that intensified every hour, spreading outward through her chest like cracks in heated glass. The migraines came first, sudden and blinding, driving her to dark rooms with her hands pressed against her temples. Then the exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that sleep could not touch. She ate because Orla made her. She slept because her body demanded it. But the rest brought no relief, and the food sat in her stomach like stones. She caught glimpses of Calder across the courtyard in the corridors, once through the open door of the council chamber as she passed. He looked worse every time. The hollows beneath his eyes had deepened into bruises. His movements, once fluid and commanding, had become stiff and deliberate. The movements of a man conserving every scrap of energy because he had so little left. Halvar found her on the 3rd day. He said nothing about the arrangement or the wolf or the king. He simply looked at her, at the shadows under her eyes, and the way her hands trembled when she reached for the mortar, and his expression told her everything she needed to know. "He has not shifted since that night," Halvar said quietly. "He cannot. The wolf will not come." The words punched through her at all. "He has tried every evening alone in the chamber for hours, nothing." Halvar's voice was steady, but his eyes were not. The tether is nearly gone. "Alan, I can see it in the way he moves, the way he breathes. Like half of him has already left." Aloan pressed her fist against the ache in her chest. "He will not let me near him, I know." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Halvar did not answer. He left her standing among the herb shelves. Her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. On the 5th morning she was grinding feverfew when the room tilted sideways, not gradually. Instantly, like someone had picked up the floor and tipped it. Her hands went slack. The mortar clattered against the bench. She gripped the edge of the table and watched the world dissolve into white static at the edges. "Orla," she managed, but the word came out wrong. Too quiet, too far away. Then, the static swallowed everything, and she was falling. She did not feel herself hit the ground. She felt arms, strong, desperate arms, catching her before impact, pulling her against a chest that was heaving with ragged breaths. She felt a heartbeat slamming against her cheek, and she heard her name spoken in a voice so raw and wrecked it barely sounded human. Aloan. Then again, louder cracking. Aloan. She could not open her eyes, but she knew the scent, cedar and iron and wolf. She knew the hands cradling her head. She knew the low, dangerous growl that rumbled through his chest when someone else tried to approach. She felt a hand brush the hair from her face with a tenderness that contradicted everything about the sound coming from his throat. And in the darkness behind her closed eyes, she felt his wolf surge forward at the moment of contact, reaching through the shattered tether because she was falling. And the beast inside him could not bear it. When she finally opened her eyes, she was in the infirmary, clean sheets, thin pillow, the familiar smell of dried rosemary and antiseptic, and Calder, sitting beside her bed with his head in his hands, looking like a man who had watched the world end and been helpless to stop it. His eyes were gray again, but the evidence of gold still lingered in the way he looked at her when he raised his head, like she was the only thing left in a room he had already burned down. "You are an idiot," Aloan croaked, his expression shattered. Not anger, a devastation far more dangerous. "Yes," he agreed. "I am." Orla shut the infirmary door with deliberate firmness and turned to face Calder with the expression of a woman whose patience had not merely run out but had packed a bag and left the kingdom entirely. "You have two options. The healer said you can tell us what happened at Ashenmoor. Everything right now in this room, or you can continue your current strategy of noble self-destruction and take this girl down with you." Calder's jaw tightened. "She is not involved. She collapsed because of you," Orla said flatly. "Her body is failing because whatever connection exists between you is being stretched past its breaking point by your insistence on separation. So yes, Your Majesty, she is involved. She has been involved since your wolf chose her in that cave." Aloan pushed herself upright against the pillows. "She is also right here, and would prefer not to be discussed as though she were absent." Childer looked at her. The fight drained from his posture in stages. First the rigidity in his shoulders, then the set of his jaw, then the clenched hands, uncurling one finger at a time. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. A man hollowed out by something he had been carrying alone for too long. "Ashenmoor," he said, and the word came out like a stone pulled from a wound, he told them. The Ashenmoor territory had been ruled by a pack led by an alpha named Soren Greycliff, a reasonable man once, a man Calder had respected, had broken bread with, had trusted to keep the eastern border stable. But the hard winter 2 years past twisted things in Soren, the losses, the starvation, the desperation. They warped a fundamental part of him. He began raiding neighboring territories for resources, then for land, then for the sheer momentum of violence that had become the only language he understood. Calder had sent envoys, offered aid, grain, timber, healers. Every offer was rejected, the raids intensified, villages burned, people died. His people innocents, who lived near the border and had no quarrel with anyone. "I did not want more," Calder said, his voice rough. "I tried every alternative, every negotiation, every concession I could justify. Soren would not hear it. He wanted the throne, or he wanted blood, or he wanted both. I was never certain which. The campaign lasted 3 weeks. It ended in a single devastating battle at Ashenmoor Pass, where Soren's forces were broken and Soren himself fell. But the battle was not the wound. The wound came after." Calder's hands were fisted on his knees, the knuckles white. In the final hours of fighting, the lines collapsed. It became chaos. Close quarters, no formations, no strategy, just wolves tearing each other apart in the mud and the smoke. He stopped, swallowed. "There was a healer," he continued, and his voice dropped to barely audible. "A woman named Vod. She had set up a field station between the lines. She was treating wounded from both sides, ours, theirs. It did not matter to her. She was a healer. That was all she cared about." Aloan felt ice forming in her stomach. She already knew where this was going. My wolf was in the blood rage. I could not control it, could not see through its eyes. When the lines collapsed and the fighting spilled into the field station, he stopped again. His breath was ragged. Vader was killed. My wolf did not distinguish between competent and healer, between enemy and innocent. It killed and it kept killing, and I could not stop it. The infirmary was absolutely still. Orla stood motionless by the door. Eloan's hands were pressed flat against the sheets, gripping the fabric. "Vad had a mother," Calder said, "a spirit walker named Wisara. She found her daughter's body after the battle, found the claw marks, knew which wolf had made them." His voice went hollow. "Why?" "Sarah walked the spirit realm the way most people walk a garden path. She found my wolf there, and she chained it, wrapped it in iron, forged from her grief and her fury and her power. and she told me that my wolf would remember every life it took, that it would carry the weight of every death until the burden broke it. The curse, Orla murmured. It was not supposed to be survivable, Calder said. Wisara intended it to kill me. She wanted the wolf to tear itself apart and the man to die with it. But I survived. The wolf survived, and instead of dying, we began to separate. He looked at his hands. The wolf carries the curse in the spirit realm. Every night it relays the deaths. The chains tighten. The memories play again and again, and the tether between us frays, because the wolf is so consumed by what it did that it no longer recognizes me as its other half. Aloan's eyes burned. She blinked hard. You said Wisara intended the curse to kill you. Is she still alive? Is she still feeding it? Calder's expression darkened. I do not know. After the battle, she disappeared. No one has seen her since. Or stepped forward, her arms crossed, her expression sharp with thought. Spirit Walker, curses can be broken. The power required to maintain chains of that magnitude is enormous. Over time, they should weaken, should fade. The fact that they have not, she trailed off studying Calder. The fact that the curse is growing stronger rather than weaker suggests one of two things. Either Wisara is still alive and actively feeding the curse from the spirit realm, or the curse found another source of power to sustain itself. She looked at Calder with an expression that held no judgment, only understanding. Guilt, the healer said quietly. Your guilt is feeding it. You believe you deserve the punishment. And that belief is pouring fuel onto a fire that should have burned out months ago. Calder did not deny it. His silence was confirmation enough. Aloan swung her legs over the side of the bed. Let me help. I can reach the spirit realm. I have been there. I can find the chains, find Wisara if she is still there, find a way to break them. No, Calder said. You will die without intervention, Orla added, looking at the king, and so will she. The connection between you ensures that. The words hung in the air. Calder's gaze found Aloan's, and she watched the war play out behind his eyes. The snorts need to protect her fighting against the knowledge that protection was killing them both. The guilt that had become so fundamental to his identity that releasing it felt like releasing himself. I cannot lose someone else, he said, and his voice broke. On the last word, Aloan held his gaze. Then, stop pushing me away. He closed his eyes, his hands unclenched. He did not agree, not in words, but the quiet that followed was different from every pause that had come before. It was the sound of a wall developing its first cracks. Orla cornered Aloan in the garden an hour later. Sit, the healer commanded, pointing at the stone bench. Aloan sat. What do you know about mate bonds? Orla asked without preamble. Aloan blinked. They are rare. Fated connections between two wolves who are supposedly designed for each other. Most shifters never encounter one. She paused. Why? Because you were living side by one. The words landed like a physical impact. Aloan gaped at the healer, her mouth slightly open, her mind racing to catch up with what her body had apparently known for weeks. The warmth you feel, Orla continued. The pain of separation, the ability to enter the spirit realm through proximity to his wolf. The way his wolf chose you instantly, without hesitation, without question. The way the man's eyes flash gold when you touch him, she raised an eyebrow. What did you think all of that was? I thought it was the curse, Owen whispered. Or proximity, or my scent. It is a mate bond, Orla said firmly. Incomplete, unacknowledged, fighting against every barrier both of you have erected, but a mate bond nonetheless. Your sleeping wolf recognized his wolf as its match the moment you entered that cave. It is why his wolf calmed, not because of your scent or your herbs or some convenient coincidence. Because you are his and he is yours, and the bond knows it, even if neither of you has been willing to say it out loud. Aloan pressed her hand against the ache in her chest. It flared in response, warm and desperate and reaching. If the bond is completed, Orla continued, it may be strong enough to reach his wolf in the spirit realm, to give you both a tether that the curse cannot sever. But if it remains incomplete, she paused, an incomplete mate bond under this kind of strain will destroy you both. It is already destroying you both. Aloan found Halvor in his office 20 minutes later, her pulse racing and her resolve hardened into iron. I need to see him, she said. Halvor studied her face. He gave orders that you are not to be admitted to his chambers. I know he will be furious. I know that too. Halvor leaned back in his chair and regarded her for a long moment. Then he reached into his desk, pulled out a key, and set it on the surface between them. South corridor, he said. Third door, past the armory. That night, Aloan let herself into the king's private chambers and stood in the center of the room, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The room was larger than the wolf's chamber, warmer, with a fire burning low, and the scent of cedar and leather soaking into every surface, his scent everywhere, surrounding her like an embrace. She had not been given permission to accept. She waited. The fire crackled. Her hands shook. When Calder opened the door and saw her, he stopped so completely it looked like he had been turned to stone. The key in his hand hung motionless. His eyes swept over her face, her body. Her hands clasped together to keep them from trembling, and his expression fractured in a way he could not piece back together fast enough. Aloan. Her name was disbelief and longing and fury and surrender compressed into 4 syllables. "You can order me to leave," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You can command it. You are the king, and I am a packless nobody with no rank and no wolf and no right to be standing in your chambers." She took a step toward him. He did not move. "But if you send me away again, you are choosing to die. And you are choosing to kill me with you because that is what an unfinished mate bond does," called her. "It tears both halves apart." The charged air between them pressed against her skin. "You know," he said, and his voice was raw. "Ors told me, but I already knew." She took another step, close enough now to see his pulse jumping in his throat, to see the way his pupils had dilated, to see the barely perceptible tremor in his hands at his sides. "I have known since the cave, since your wolf wrapped itself around me, and every empty, aching thing inside me went quiet for the first time in my life." Calder's composure shattered, not slowly, not in stages, but like a dam giving way. "I feel you everywhere," he said, his voice breaking. "In every room I enter, in every corridor I walk, your scent is in my lungs, and I cannot get it out, and I do not want to get it out, and it is driving me to madness." His hand came up, hovering near her face, not touching, trembling. "My wolf is dying in chains, and the only thing it asks for is you. The only word it gives me anymore is your name, over and over. Just your name." She took his face in her hands and pressed her forehead against his. "Then let me stay," she whispered. He kissed her, or she kissed him. It happened at the same moment, the same breath, a collision that felt less like a choice and more like gravity. His hands found her waist, her hair, the curve of her jaw, pulling her against him with a desperate urgency that stole the air from her lungs. She responded with equal ferocity, pouring every ounce of longing and frustration and bone-deep need into the press of her mouth against his. "If I do not stop," he said against her lips, his breath ragged, "I will not be able to." "Then do not stop," she said. He lifted her with an ease that made her breath catch, carrying her across the room. What followed was overwhelming and tender and fierce. 2 people who had been starving finally given permission to eat. Every touch felt like a homecoming. Every breath shared between them deepened a connection that went far beyond the physical, as though 2 broken halves of a single vessel were finally being fitted back together. And then his teeth found her neck. The claiming bite, instinctive and sure, and the bond blazed to life. It exploded through her chest like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds, golden and warm, and so vast it filled every hollow space inside her. She felt him, truly felt him. Not just his presence, but his soul. The man and the wolf and the grief and the love and the desperate, clinging hope that he had been hiding behind walls for months. She marked him in return, claiming him as hers, and the bond flared brighter, sealed, complete, unbreakable. They lay tangled together afterward, his arms wrapped around her, her head on his chest, their breathing slowly steadying into a shared rhythm. The bond hummed between them like a living thing, warm and golden and sure. "I should have let you stay," he murmured against her hair. "Yes," Ian agreed. "You should have." His arms tightened. She felt him smile against her temple. Sleep came for them both, gentle and irresistible. Aloan closed her eyes and let the warmth carry her under, feeling safer and more whole than she had ever felt in her life. She woke in the dark forest. The cold was absolute. Not the cold of winter or stone or empty rooms. A cold that lived in the bones, that pressed inward from every direction, that existed specifically to remind you that warmth was a thing you had once known and would never know again. Aloan stood among the dead pines, barefoot in the snow, and felt the bond flaring in her chest like a torch. Beside her, Calder stood rigid, his jaw locked, his fists clenched at his sides. He was here. Both of them together, pulled into the spirit realm by a bond, strong enough to bridge the gap between worlds. "You see it now," Calder said, his voice flat. "What I see every time I close my eyes." She did. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, the trees reaching upward like the fingers of drowned men. The snow fell without wind, without sound, without temperature, just a visual wrongness that added to the suffocating unreality of the place. And ahead, in a clearing, the wolf, Aloan, made a sound in her throat, involuntary and broken. The wolf was worse. So much worse than the last time she had been here. The chains were tighter, biting deep into its body, wrapped around its legs and chest and throat in layers that glowed with that sickly greenish light. Its fur was matted and dull, its gold eyes, those brilliant burning eyes that had looked at her with such recognition in the cave, were dim and glassy. It was still breathing barely. Every night, Calder said beside her, every night for 5 months I have stood here and watched it suffer, and every night I am unable to do a single thing to stop it. Aloan started toward the wolf, but Calder caught her arm. Wait, he said. They come first. They came from the fog, from between the trees, from the spaces where the shadows pulled too deeply. Figures, dozens of them, then hundreds, emerging from the gray in a slow, terrible procession. Soldiers in bloodied armor, civilians with hollow eyes and wounds that gaped and wept, wolves in human form, broken and wrong, moving with the disjointed gait of things that remembered walking but had forgotten why. The dead of Ashen Moor, every single one. They filled the clearing, surrounded the chained wolf, and stood in silent accusation. Their eyes were fixed on Calder, not on Aloan, not on the wolf, on him. The man who had ordered the march, the man whose wolf had killed without discrimination in the chaos of battle. Aloan felt Calder's grief through the bond, a tidal wave of guilt and horror and bottomless sorrow that nearly drove her to her knees. He carried this every night. This was the weight that was killing him, and he had borne it alone because he believed he had earned it. Then the figures parted, and she walked forward. Vad Aloan knew her instantly, not from sight but from the way Calder's guilt crystallized and focused into a single point of agony, so sharp it cut through the bond like a blade. The healer was young, younger than Aloan, with kind eyes and gentle hands, and a wound across her chest that told the story of how she had died. She wore a healer's apron, still stained with the blood of the people she had been trying to save when the fighting reached her. She stopped in front of Calder and looked up at him. You promised safety, Vader said, and her voice was soft and terrible. You promised the healers would be protected. You gave your word. Calder's face contorted. I know your word was not enough, Vader continued. Your wolf did not care about promises. It only cared about blood. Aloan felt Calder buckle beside her, felt his knees weaken, felt the bond flood with a self-loathing so profound it tasted like ash in her mouth. He believed every word, not because the ghost was saying it, but because the ghost was using his own thoughts, speaking the poison he had been drinking willingly for months. And behind the ghost, behind the dead, standing at the far edge of the clearing with arms outstretched and palms glowing with greenish light, was the figure from the trees. Sarah Aloan could see her now, an old woman gaunt and hollowed by grief, her eyes burning with the same sickly light as the chains. She was not a memory. She was not a ghost. She was here alive, feeding the curse from the spirit realm, pouring her rage and her loss into the chains that held the wolf. But even as Alan watched, she saw the truth that Orla had named. Asara's power alone was not enough. The chains should have weakened months ago, should have faded. The spirit walker's grief was vast, but grief was finite. It burned hot, and then it burned out. What kept the chains strong, what kept them growing tighter, what made this prison inescapable, was not with Sar's fury. It was Calder's agreement. He believed he deserved this. And that belief was the lock that no key could open from the outside. Aloan turned to Calder. He was on his knees now, his head bowed, his hands pressed flat against the cold ground. The dead surrounded him in their silent chorus, and Vader's ghost stood before him like a mirror, reflecting everything he hated about himself. The bond between them was screaming. She could feel it, a raw, desperate pull trying to drag him back from the edge of surrender. He was letting go not of the guilt but of himself, agreeing with the curse the way a drowning man agrees with the water. Calder, she said, kneeling beside him. Look at me. He did not move. The dead pressed closer. Sar's hands burned brighter. The chains around the wolf tightened with a sound like cracking bones, and the wolf let out a whimper, so broken it brought tears to Aloan's eyes. She grabbed his face with both hands and forced him to look at her. His eyes were gray and empty and resigned, and the sight of them terrified her more than anything else in this terrible place. You think you deserve this, she said. I can feel it through the bond. Every thought, every belief. You think Vader's death was your failure. You think the wolf's violence was your fault. You think that if you suffer enough, if you let the curse take you apart piece by piece, it will somehow balance the scales. He tried to look away. She held him firm. It will not, she said, her voice shaking. It will never be enough because that is not how guilt works. You could suffer for 1,000 years and it would not bring Vader back. It would not undo a single death. All it will do is add one more body to the count, yours. I could not control my wolf, Cutter said, and the words scraped out of him like broken glass. She was healing people. She was saving lives on both sides, and my wolf tore through that field station, like every person in it was nothing more than meat. Vader's ghost moved closer. A better king would have stopped it, the ghost murmured. A better man would have held the leash. Aloan felt the words land in Calder's chest through the bond, felt them sink into the wound that had become the foundation of his identity, and she felt a fierce, furious certainty rising inside her, born from the same place where the warmth lived, the place that had been empty her entire life until a wolf in a cave had filled it. I know what it feels like, Aloan said, to believe you are fundamentally broken. Calder's eyes flickered, a crack in the emptiness. I was left on a forest floor as an infant, she continued, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face wrapped in wolf pelts. No name, no pack, no explanation, and my wolf never came. Every other shifter I ever met had their wolf by the time they were 12. I waited, I prayed, I begged, and nothing came. She took a shaking breath. So I decided I was the problem, that I was defective, that my parents had known it, and that is why they left me. And I spent my entire life trying to earn my right to exist by being useful, by being small, by being whatever anyone needed me to be so they would not leave me too. The ghost of Vod wavered. Yara's glow flickered. I fed that belief every single day. Aloan said, I wrapped it around myself like chains, and I called it truth, and it was eating me alive. Calder, the same way your guilt is eating you. She pressed her forehead against his. The bond blazed between them, gold and fierce and defiant. But I was wrong, she whispered. My wolf was never missing. It was sleeping, waiting for something worth waking up for. And your wolf is not a monster. It is a wolf that fought a war it did not start to protect people. It could not bear to lose. Vader's death was a tragedy, born from chaos and violence, and a situation no single person could have controlled. It does not make you a murderer. It makes you a man who fought a war and carries the cost. She pulled back and looked him in the eyes. You are allowed to carry the memory without carrying the chains. You are allowed to grieve Vod without letting the grief kill your wolf. You are allowed to live, called her, even though she did not. The quiet that followed was the deepest Aloan had ever known, not the oppressive hush of the cursed forest, but a different kind of stillness, a held breath, a turning point. Calder's hands came up and covered hers where they held his face. His fingers were trembling. I am sorry, he said, and the words were not directed at Aloan. He was looking past her, at Vader's ghost, at the dead, at the weight of every life his wolf had taken. I am sorry I could not stop it. I am sorry you were there. I am sorry that the world I was trying to protect could not protect you. His voice broke and the tears came. Not the controlled, suppressed grief of a king maintaining composure, but the shattering, full-bodied sobs of a man's one finally allowing himself to feel the thing he had been running from for 5 months. He collapsed forward into Aloan's arms, and she held him, her hands gripping his shoulders, her face pressed against his hair. But I will not die here, Calder said through the wreckage of his voice. I will not give up the people who are still alive. I will not give up my wolf. He looked up at Aloan, his eyes raw and red and more alive than she had ever seen them, and I will not give up you. Across the clearing, the chains shuddered, the greenish light stuttered and dimmed. Ware's figure screamed, a sound of pure frustrated rage, and her hands clawed at the air, trying to hold the curse together, but the foundation had cracked. The guilt that had been feeding the chains was draining away, not disappearing. Grief did not work that way, but transforming from poison into sorrow, from chains into memory. The iron links shattered one by one, falling away from the wolf's body like dead leaves. The wolf staggered, swayed, and lifted its massive head. Its gold eyes blazed, bright and burning, and alive. Wazara's figure dissolved like smoke and wind, her scream fading into the hush between the trees. The dead turned away. One by one, figure by figure, they walked back into the fog and were gone. Vader was the last. She looked at Calder for a long, quiet moment. Then she closed her eyes, and the faintest suggestion of peace crossed her face before she faded into nothing. The wolf crossed the clearing on unsteady legs and pressed its head against Cedar's chest. Aloan felt it through the bond, the tether snapping taut, reforging the two halves of his soul reaching for each other after months of agonizing separation. Calder wrapped his arms around the wolf's neck and buried his face in its fur, and the sound he made was neither human nor animal, but older and deeper than both. The forest dissolved. The snow stopped falling. The cold retreated. Aloan opened her eyes in Calder's chambers, dawn light spilling golden through the windows. He was beside her, his arms around her, his face buried in her hair. The bond hummed between them, warm and complete and unbroken. And deep in Aloan's chest, in the place that had been empty and aching for her entire life, a new warmth stirred, golden and fierce and unmistakable, a presence that had been sleeping for 23 years and was finally beginning to wake her wolf. The wolf and the man did not heal overnight. The tether reforged in the spirit realm was strong but tender, like a bone that had been broken and set. It needed time and care and patience, and Calder had never been a patient man, but he learned.